Here are 7 powerful ways to integrate principles of neurobiology into your speeches that build trust, influence, and connection. I'm going to go through this document with you real quick. And I know that a lot of times neurobiology, that whole thing, it all sounds intimidating. It's not at all. It's very intuitive. It's very instinctive. And I think when we go through these things, you'll start to see why I think it's so important to think about the neurobiology and how already intuitive a lot of this is. So first, start by creating safety. Flip the trust switch. And so when you start your speech, it's good to open with warmth and authenticity. And a lot of times the people I work with, the people that are watching these videos, you're very intimidating already. You've got a high position, you've got a lot of accolades. So if you can open with a little bit of vulnerability that maybe provides some insight and some connection to your audience, it's going to go a long way because they're already intimidated. You don't need to do that. What we need to do is connect. And a smile that fires up our mirror neurons, and keep your hands visible at all times when you're in front of audiences, because the minute that a hand disappears into a pocket, let's say, or behind your back, our paleo-mammalian brain checks out. We're not listening anymore. We're not paying attention. We're worried about what you're doing with that hand. Number 2, leverage mirror neurons to build a connection. So, our brains have mirror neurons. We feel what we see other people experiencing. So if you're up on stage and you are very shut down and nervous, everybody in your audience is going to feel that way as well. But if you come out and you're excited and you're focused on them, you may still be sweating. You may still have a little jiggle in your voice. But if you are excited and focused on them, they'll be excited and focused on you. Get those mirror neurons on your side. So give them something good to mirror. Number 3, engage the oxytocin that connects us with skillful storytelling. Oxytocin is the hormone. They call it the love hormone. It has other side aspects of itself, but it's how we get connected in groups. And so when you share stories that illustrate your points, when you make sure that your stories have emotional highs and lows that we can mirror and go on with you, you include characters and tension, not just data. There's nothing to mirror. There's nothing to connect with in data. It's what the data means and how we got to the data or how that data got created. Brene Brown says, what if stories are just data with a soul? So give your data soul through storytelling. And bring in some sensory details. Don't just say I was walking down the street. Say I was walking down the street. It was super cold and the wind was blowing hard. And I was just bundled up and thinking, right? So now all of a sudden, there are people that, like, much more of their brain gets engaged by that than I was walking down the street thinking. Number 4, create moments of novelty to capture attention. That's dopamine, which is a pleasant stimulus for human beings. Maybe we're getting too much of it in the wrong places right now, but in your talk, you can use dopamine. So ways to do that are break patterns, like, set an expectation and meet it, set an expectation and meet it, set an expectation and then break it in an interesting way. That's what joke telling is. It's also what good storytelling is. You can use surprising metaphors, sudden change in tone. You can also shift formats, right? Move from speaking to audience interaction, click black click the clicker so the slides go black and bring out a physical prop. Things like that will re-engage and engage people. And then again, tell stories. Like I talk about that all the time. Hearing an emotionally charged, well-crafted story releases dopamine in the audience and makes whatever point you're trying to make memorable. If you don't tell a story, they're not going to remember the point. Number 5, use rhythmic repetition to enhance retention. So that's called hippocampal priming. You don't have to remember that, but it's where you give people prior exposure to something and then bring it back. So that repetition can stress things. I mean, and one of the most obvious examples is Martin Luther King. I have a dream, and say some more. I have a dream, right? Bringing it back to that mantra. You can also use parallel structures in your key points. Like that's always really good to do when you're bringing things through in a line and it all makes sense, not only as you're going through it, but it also has parallels. And don't be afraid to pause after you make your main point and say it again. In other words, don't be afraid to pause after you make your main point and say it again. People will appreciate that you cued them to something that's essential and important. And then another one that I think people don't always think of or know about, so this could be a secret, not on purpose, is tap into multisensory engagement. So when you use compelling visuals or sounds or even onstage objects, that really brings people in. And, I find myself saying, as I say in the document, this is a great book report. Now take us on a journey. So the way you do that is through compelling sounds, on-stage objects, visuals. You can ask the audience to imagine or physically do something like close your eyes and imagine that you're standing there at the free throw line and you're bouncing a basketball. And you got your eyes closed and you're bouncing this basketball and you're thinking about how badly you need to make this free throw. Right now, the audience is in that moment. It's engaging much more of their brain than just imagine if you had to make that free throw. And it's going to really bring people in. And then finally, this is super important. This gets missed all the time, even by really great speakers and communicators. Don't assume people will know how you're feeling in that moment, in the story, in that low point. Tell them. Be more explicit about what feelings you're experiencing in those moments where you're going through something. And then when you have the realization, and I was super excited to realize it. And then I got terrified because I realized I was going to have to do that, right? So bring us into your feelings more. And then, the lower you take us, the higher you can lift us. And when you're in those low moments, I find people often, they don't want to talk about those emotions very much. They're super excited to talk about when they were elated because they finally won. But if you don't share those low moments and don't get us emotionally connected to those, we're not going to appreciate the high moments with you. And number 7, end with a call to action. And depending on your setting, in the paper, we say end with a call to action that feels safe and rewarding. Safe might be the wrong word. Maybe what we really mean is doable and rewarding, something that is actually possible. So, when you conclude, help the audience's brain associate action with positive emotions and not fear is the point. So make that first step simple and achievable. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step, and you can do that, right? And then just keep going. So use affirmative language that emphasizes the benefits rather than the risks. Now, you may have already talked about the risks, and a lot of times we've got to talk about the downsides and the difficulties and all that kind of stuff. But when we get to the end, what we say at the very end is what people are going to take out with them. And so we want to use that affirmative language, emphasize the benefits, the reasons they would go do these hard things and take these risks, and send them out focused on that aspect of things. I put in here one possible way that it could go, and you can be creative and switch it up if you want, but this will work. Open with a relevant, connecting, personal story, signals safety, engages the oxytocin. Maybe it demonstrates what I call insightful vulnerability with an insight that's meaningful to people. Then vivid stories and unexpected moments, that gets mirror neurons and dopamine going. And then throughout, repeating that core phrase, not too much, but enough that it becomes more memorable for the repetition. That's hippocampal reinforcement. And then close with the empowering, emotionally positive call to action. And if you would like to get from me I've got 2 documents. One is